when I went to be the U.S. ambassador, my friends who were so involved with Hunt Alternatives Fund in Denver said, "What are you doing? Are you just like, are you burnt out? And like you're going to go and, you know, rub shoulders with people at cocktail parties? Like, what are you doing?" And I said, "Look, if that's what I'm going to do, I'll be back. I'll be back in a year." In fact, it's not what happened. The bilateral relationship between Austria and the U.S. was fine. I could do that. I did that. But what was most important was that Yugoslavia, right next door, was falling apart. We were celebrating the liberation of concentration camps in Austria, and people were saying, "Never again, never again." Well, it was happening right there. And I used to wonder, who were these policymakers at the big mahogany desks when Hitler was rolling over, you know, Europe? And I was the policymaker at the big mahogany desk. And so I thought, oh my gosh, what do I do? How do you, like, so I would go down into Croatia or into Bosnia, where the Serbs were just rolling through the towns with their tanks and shooting up the Catholic churches, leaving the Serb churches, and there were concentration camps. There were literally concentration camps. There were rape camps. It was horrible. And we had 70,000 refugees who had flooded into Austria. And so I was like in there talking with them. It worked on me. There was a horrible massacre of Srebrenica. And we allowed it to happen. The UN allowed it to happen. It became the tripwire for U.S. intervention to stop the war. But in this massacre, about 9,000 unarmed boys and men were rounded up and separated from the women and girls, and they were all executed. But the women didn't know that, and so the women kept waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for their boys and men to come. I needed to be there with them. And the UN had just walked away because they were so ashamed. And the US had walked away. And these women were living in burnt out houses, literally. So I said, okay, we've got to get the world's attention. Now, it's a year later, so we'll convene these women. And each one, they decided this, each one in a big sports stadium, an indoor sports stadium, there were about 30,000, and each one would embroider the name of missing boys and men on a fabric. And I keep this fabric near me. One of the women gave it to me afterwards. It's the name of her son and the year he was born, 1972, and he was born in Srebrenica, and she never saw him again. You know, a woman like this, you know, she would have lost her husband, her 2 brothers, and 3 sons, all at once. But it isn't just that she saw them shot, it's that she didn't know. And so she waited and waited and waited and waited. And this woman said, look, I have 3 boys. I have 3 boys. I know that my husband and brothers couldn't escape, but my middle boy, he was the fastest runner in his class. And I know he's in the woods, he's hiding. He doesn't know that the war is over. I think he's hiding. I think he escaped because he was such a fast runner. And then she would be trembling like this. And when I decided I would try to bring them together to say, the world hasn't forgotten you. And Christian Amanpour was there, you know, we had all kinds of coverage in the media. But as we were putting it together, the military, the U.S. military said, well, we will not provide protection for you and Queen Noor and others who are coming unless you also have the Serb mothers. And I said, what? What? I mean, the Serbs were the aggressors here. And he said, yeah, but we have to be even-handed. And I've written a couple of books about that kind of thinking. So you can imagine how I disagree. But I went to the woman like who's standing there trembling, and I said, look, I hate to ask you this, but the military say that they won't protect us unless we have Serb mothers. And then I thought, oh, God, how could I? What am I thinking? What am I thinking? You don't go to someone with that kind of raw wound and say, oh, and by the way, we want to have the person who's the mother of the guy who killed your son and brother. You know, and this woman looked at me holding this, and she said, Ambassador, we are all mothers. that was a turning point in my life. And I said, that kind of reaching across and seeing the person on the other side, not the enemy on the other side, that kind of humanizing the other, that's what will give us a different world. That's what will break gridlock in the US Congress so that we can have a functioning democracy. That's what will change the budgets and determine how much we're putting into weapons versus how much we're putting into educating. That's what will actually stop wars. It will prevent wars. It will shorten wars. It will stabilize a chaotic community after a war. That ability to say, we are all mothers. And I'm not saying that somehow all the goodness of humanity resides in women and all the evil of humanity resides in men. That's not what I'm saying. But look, when you turn on the television and you hear Eritreans are fighting with the Ethiopians, take a look. Take a look and see what actually is on the screen. It's the Ethiopian guys who are fighting with the Eritrean guys, right? So let's come up with some bold, audacious, new ways of thinking, because we have untapped resources. And I was hosting negotiations in that war in 1994. 14 days. We came to Washington for the signing of the peace agreement. I'm sitting in this auditorium, Presidents Clinton, Izetbegovic, and Tudjman from Bosnia, from Croatia. I look around in the room and I think, oh, how did this happen? It was all men, and I didn't see it. And the reason I didn't see it is because I was looking through a different lens. I wasn't thinking, how do you build peace? I was thinking, how do you stop a war? Well, let's figure out who the guys are with the guns. Let's get them to put their guns under the table, and how they can figure out then how they'll divide up the booty. Like, that's a crazy way to try to build peace, by rewarding the guys who are the warlords. What do they know about building peace? So what you do, they have to be at the table, no question. You put more chairs around the table. We do a lot of work in Afghanistan. So we just brought over 14 women from Afghanistan. They had 2 meetings at the White House with highest level people, not the president, but very high people. State Department, Pentagon, you know, they were all over the place. One of the things that one of the women said to an Undersecretary of Defense was, you put me at the negotiating table with the Taliban when we're talking about how the Taliban will reintegrate with the Afghan government. You put me at that table. The first day, the Taliban will stare at their shoes because they can't look at me. The second day, they'll be looking sideways. The third day, we'll be talking. And she said, these are our boys, these are our men, they are our family. And if my arm is hurting, I don't cut off my arm. But I'd better be at that table.